Encountering a resistance program is actually a cause for excitement. What looks like an obstacle is actually a portal. And if you know how to use it, it can be the means to fast-track your progress and finally break through old habits and limitations. So when someone comes to me with resistance, I feel like giving them a round of applause. It's not quite time to pop the champagne yet, but that will come once you realize the opportunity in front of you and take it with both hands. Hi, and welcome back to the Amara Strand podcast. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest hurdles in personal growth, spiritual growth, magical growth, whatever path of transformation you're on. At some point, you're sure to run into an internal wall of resistance. It's that voice in your head that says, "Oh, this is too hard," or that sinking feeling that stops you before you even start. By the end of our talk today, you'll understand why this happens and how to peel back the layers of programming to reveal that your resistance and self-sabotage is really an outdated strategy to meet a critical need. And when we peel all the layers back, we reveal the gatekeeper metaprograms that act as keys to personal authority and your authentic self. We've all experienced resistance, the default programming that steps in and cuts you off at the knees. You're ready to grow, to transform, and to deepen, to stop playing it small and step into a higher octave of your being. At first, you're excited, motivated, and it feels amazing to commit to your own growth, to invest in becoming more of who you really are. You set your intention, you have a structure of daily practice to support your growth, and everything goes great for a while, and then you hit a wall of resistance. You find reasons not to do your practices. The motivation and intention that was so clear and simple, so direct and alive, the illumination of your living will, suddenly feels clouded, dull, or unavailable. And without that clarity of purpose, that clarity of agency, progress starts feeling like a real struggle, an uphill battle. Instead of just doing the practices, you either actively find reasons not to, or you labor beneath a veil of doubt, lethargy, and distraction, trying to muster up enough energy and motivation to keep at it. You've hit a wall of resistance, and while it feels awful to be kicked out of your clarity and purpose, encountering a resistance program is actually a cause for excitement. What looks like an obstacle is actually a portal. Resistance often feels like self-sabotage. But here's the twist. It's actually your brain trying to protect you. There's a super powerful part of your brain that's exclusively wired for survival, not success. And when you step outside your comfort zone, you trigger default survival programs that seek to rein you back in. Think of resistance as a security system. When that alarm goes off, it's loud and obnoxious, but it's only doing its job. The problem is the program is outdated. In fact, it's often a childhood survival program, and the danger it's trying to save you from doesn't actually exist. We're going to take an in-depth look at how this works by using a specific example of resistance, and we'll uncover the mechanics and underlying motivations of these default survival programs. So let's take a real-life example and see if we can transform a wall of resistance into a portal of transformation. I asked the participants in my energetic hygiene course to give me specific examples of resistance programs that are coming up for them as they go through the weekly lessons. The resistance program we're going to be talking about today is called The Sandbox and was generously submitted by Elizabeth. I like to suss out the theme of a program and give it a name because it makes it easier to visualize and identify. You see, programs are not standalone. They're nested or exist in a web of similar programs. When you start recognizing their themes and give them names, you can get a wider view of their combined actions and effects in your life. The Sandbox uses fear of abandonment and rejection to keep Elizabeth contained in an invisible prison. A prison sounds awful, doesn't it? But Elizabeth is not miserable or suffering. She's created quite a nice life for herself. Home, family, friends, a career, love, and stability. So Elizabeth's prison is more like a walled garden. But since the source of her limitation is a childhood survival program, I named it the sandbox. The energy source for this resistance program is the fear and unmet needs of a very young child. Now, let's hear what Elizabeth has to say about how this resistance program manifests. I think many of you will relate to it. She writes, "The resistance I tend to face comes from aspects that do not want me to change too much. It's okay to improve myself a bit and practice energetic hygiene, but there's a limiter in place that prevents things from going too far. This looks like not being consistent with certain practices or not going too deep. The inner narrator says things like, being dedicated and consistent with every practice is hard. Plus, how do I explain to my family and friends that I'm on an influence fast, so I won't be taking their calls? I suppose this is all par for the course. I mean, have you seen my birth chart? It's in my nature to prefer that things stay as they are. To mitigate this, I've talked with the wounded self that fears abandonment, the one that believes that committing to these practices equals too much change too quickly, which equates to losing all I love and hold dear. I've pointed out times that my life has subtly or radically shifted, and that ultimately it has led to overall improvements. I remind these scared parts that while my husband or sister, for example, may not fully grasp my motivations for whichever experiment I try, they have been supportive. I've also asked myself if staying exactly where I am is okay. It's okay to not want to see reality more clearly, to have self-mastery. This is true, and it calms my system a little bit, but it's not ultimately what I want. The buck doesn't stop here. And the larger pattern looks like dragging myself uphill through the resistance, set on advancement. It makes the climb more difficult and more likely that I'll twist an ankle as I'm looking back at the weight behind me instead of watching where my feet land. This pattern prevents me from reaching my full potential. It keeps me playing small, daring to stretch myself a little at a time when it feels safe to do so. Okay, a show of hands, please. Who can relate? Have you run into your own version of this resistance program that keeps you locked into playing the small game? Elizabeth must stay inside the sandbox. If she encounters a path of practice and discovery that will lead her out of that sandbox and into a greater reality, a greater self-expression, the program is triggered. So once you encounter a resistance program, what do? The first step is to recognize the program. Resistance can take so many forms, and it isn't always immediately obvious that you're dealing with a program. Sometimes it looks like procrastination. Other times it's getting bogged down in overthinking, captured by distraction, or paralyzed by perfectionism. Just think of a goal or a practice you've recently committed yourself to. What excuses came up? Did you feel too tired, too busy, or just not ready? That's resistance at work. And those thoughts and feelings and beliefs aren't genuinely yours. They're generated by a program. And this is why it's so important to learn to distinguish your true inner voice from that of the programs. You'll notice that Elizabeth experiences thoughts, beliefs, and feelings such as, it's in my nature to resist change. But she correctly attributes these to what she calls the inner narrator. She doesn't take ownership of them as her own authentic thoughts, beliefs, and feelings. As we continue to deconstruct this nest of programming, you'll notice an important thread that we'll come back to again and again, and it looks like this. First, you need to be able to distinguish what's true, what's real, what's authentic. You need to know what's you and what's not you. And secondly, don't give your energy, your identity, your authority to anything that's not real. You'll get a clearer picture of this as we get into the mechanics of these programs. Thoughts, feelings, and beliefs generated by the program are very compelling, but the critical first step is to recognize they are not authentic, not yours, and ultimately not real. Now that you've recognized a resistance program has been triggered, the next step is to observe and document all the ways it attempts to trap your focus, your energy, and ultimately your consciousness into a synthetic reality. It does this by tightly wrapping you in a pattern or grid of thoughts, beliefs, and images. Get in the habit of observing and writing down as many of these as you can spot. Whenever you encounter a resistance program, the first thing you want to do is write down as much as you can about it. Don't just think about it. Actually start mapping it out using words, graphs, and images. You want to get a clear picture of what triggers it. Write down exactly the thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and images it presents to you, as well as all the tactics it uses. So to reiterate, the 3 things you're going to carefully document are triggers, propaganda, and that will come in the form of thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and images, and tactics. Tactics are the conditions and mind states it produces, such as boredom, brain fog, forgetfulness, tardiness, resentment, or overwhelm. Observing the program with curiosity, objectivity, and keen interest, documenting its activity and methods, not only gives you important information, but just the act of doing it creates space between you and it. Instead of automatically absorbing its propaganda, your focus is on observing it, knowing it, and this immediately gives you more clarity and agency. You start to recognize the tone, the voice, the signature feeling of the program as distinct from your own. The program has certain characteristics, a certain tone of voice, specific words and phrases. After a while, you easily, naturally recognize the characteristics of the program and realize immediately that it's not you. And here's a tip for those of you working in advanced mode. At first, you'll notice and document specific thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, but eventually you may be able to feel the grid itself, the pattern these thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and images form within and around you, the actual structure of the false reality. We notice a thought or feeling and we deal with it individually, coming up with counter-arguments or antidotes for each one. But any individual thought or feeling isn't going to have that much effect on you. It's the combination of the program's propaganda and tactics that form a grid around you, and that grid is the imposition of a false reality. That grid can only be maintained with your own energy and endorsement. You invest your energy into the false reality, and this is how the structure maintains its integrity. Without your energy investment, the structure can't cohere. If you're operating in advanced mode, you can feel the grid or pattern, how it tries to contain you and limit you into a particular shape to keep you contained in the false reality. You can focus on and document all the ways it siphons your energy and identity in order to maintain and strengthen itself. If you can feel or perceive this grid, which is the very energetic device that keeps you limited, you can break it. You can break the energy structure itself. So in this advanced mode, you're focusing on energy awareness, management, and mastery in order to undermine the structural integrity of the grid. Okay, back to the basics and back to Elizabeth's sandbox program. When you're documenting the program, you're going to want to get really specific. For instance, Elizabeth's program isn't triggered when she signs up for a course. It isn't triggered when she does certain practices. She can explore and build increasingly intricate and beautiful sandcastles without triggering the program, as long as she stays within the sandbox. The program is only triggered when she approaches doing something that will lead her out of the sandbox. So when her program gets triggered, it lets her know she's bumped up against the limit or the boundary of the small self, the small reality. Elizabeth, if you were to carefully track exactly when and what triggers the program, you could visualize the limits of your small self versus the greater reality. You could actually map out the territory and borders of your sandbox and create a visual representation of what playing small looks like. What aspects of self and reality lie outside of that boundary? This is what the program is coaxing you to trade away. Carefully documenting what triggers resistance can show you the walls of an otherwise invisible prison. When you're deconstructing resistance, the surface level is often a childhood survival program. This is what gets triggered, and in Elizabeth's example, this is exactly what happens. Childhood survival programs are created by your system when you're a vulnerable child, and as the name implies, their purpose is to protect you from death. Even if you were raised by a loving family, you still have these archaic, outdated survival programs. They are very rudimentary, not sophisticated at all, but they're incredibly powerful because they're linked to survival. This is a very primitive yet immensely potent part of your system. We're going to deconstruct Elizabeth's childhood program, and then I'll explain what happens after it gets triggered, which may surprise you. Simply put, a childhood survival program is a program created to protect you from dying of parental or family violence, neglect, or abandonment before you're old enough to take care of yourself. The surface layers of a childhood survival program may not seem to have anything to do with protecting you from death. The surface layers might be about being responsible for the feelings of others, or needing to fit in, or seeking validation. Or in Elizabeth's case, it's about staying within the comfort zones and expectations of others to avoid the risk of rejection. But if you keep asking the program, why do I need to stay within the comfort zones of others? What will happen if others abandon me? You'll peel off each successive layer until you can't go any further and finally arrive at this, a fear of death. So at some point as a very small child, Elizabeth developed a belief that it was not okay to be her full self. She developed a belief that there were aspects of herself that were too big, too different, or too potent. There were aspects of herself that she couldn't explain or justify. There were aspects of self that might make the important people in her life uncomfortable or disappointed, or they might feel they couldn't truly know or understand her, and this might lead to them not accepting her. She wouldn't truly belong, and this might lead to withdrawal of love, support, and protection. Her childhood survival system equated this with being rejected and abandoned. Abandonment and rejection at a young age equals death. That's how the childhood survival system reads it. Sometimes we stop asking questions before we get to that last layer, and we erroneously assume that the program is trying to prevent us from being hurt. Abandonment and rejection are indeed emotionally painful, more so to a child, but that's still one layer up from the core logic, the core programming. Because to an adult, abandonment is painful. To a child who is utterly dependent on others for survival, abandonment is death. And you might wonder, was any of this true? Was the core logic of her childhood survival program based on an accurate understanding of reality? If Elizabeth expressed her full range of being when she was a small child, would that have placed her in mortal danger? Would her parents have driven her out to the desert and left her there? Does it matter? Let's be clear about this. Even if she was truly in danger of being abandoned, even if this program was instrumental in keeping her alive as a child, even then, it was never meant to persist beyond childhood. The threat is no longer real. As an adult, rejection and abandonment are emotionally painful, not lethal. And if you think about it, there are many practical safety measures and devices that applied to us as children, but we don't carry on using them as adults. I mean, when was the last time you slept in a bed with rails and bars to keep you from falling out? Or when was the last time you had to hold someone's hand when crossing the road? So whether or not the logic of the childhood survival program was ever accurate isn't the point. You're an adult, and you're meant to know yourself and meet your needs in present time and exercise your agency to make choices about what you want to do, who you want to become, and what really matters to you. And you're meant to do this based on reality, on what's true for you in present time. Continuing to live in the false reality of a childhood survival program prevents you from seeing yourself and your reality accurately, and this is not inconsequential. Even though Elizabeth's life is quite pleasant, and her time in the sandbox doesn't cause her explicit suffering or anguish, the choices she makes and the paths of self-discovery she chooses to follow don't represent her true agency because she's being led to make those choices by the inner propaganda, the grid of false reality generated by the program. You'll recall that one of the ways Elizabeth tried to release the grip of this resistance program is to talk to the wounded parts of herself, the child self that fears being rejected and abandoned. Elizabeth has a lot of self-awareness and instinctively opened up the childhood survival program. And that's what you'll want to do as well. Once you've documented the triggers, the propaganda, and the tactics, look for the fear and follow it back to the first time you can recall experiencing it. It might surprise you how far back it truly was. When you find a child self who experienced this fear, you can talk to her, reassure her, and ask her why she feels this way. What happened exactly that led her to feel this way? Once she's explained it, you can ask her if there were any earlier instances that she can show you. Be patient. This might lead to a younger child self coming forward, and you can do the same process with her. Depending on how adept you are at this kind of visualization, you may see and interact with your child self as clearly as if they were sat in front of you. But if you don't perceive it in this way, it's totally fine. You may only receive feelings and images, memories, or impressions. Any information you gain and however it comes to you is okay. Don't place any expectations on how the experience should happen. When you get to this original layer of the program, the youngest version, you'll find a wounded or frightened child. This child has an unmet need. What was that need? In Elizabeth's case, it might have been a need for unconditional acceptance. Even if who she is and the world she perceives is different than what others expect, she would be accepted and continue to be loved, protected, and to belong. What you want to uncover from the wounded child layer of the program is this. What was your need? Why wasn't it met? What strategy did you create to take care of yourself? And we can try this using Elizabeth's example. What do you need? I need to feel safe. What do you need to feel safe? I need to be accepted and loved for who I am. Why can't you be loved and accepted for who you are? Because I'm different. How are you different? And here you can uncover all the ways you were different, all the things that you felt others disapproved of, all the things about yourself, big and small, that made you feel unacceptable. But you still need to be accepted and loved. Yes, I do. How do you get that need met? I shut off parts of myself that aren't acceptable and become a version of myself that is safe for people to love and accept. Did it work? Yes. What do people acknowledge and praise most about this smaller, safer version of yourself? The purpose of this inquiry is to uncover the existential need, the reason the need wasn't met, and the coping strategy the child devised to meet it the best she could. In this example, I'm taking liberties with Elizabeth's wounded child to illustrate how this dialogue proceeds. Now that you know the critical unmet need of this childhood survival program, you can devise healthy adult ways to meet it. And you must meet this need. It's non-negotiable. You can either do that consciously, intelligently as an adult, or the strategy that the child devised will continue to run as your default. As I mentioned, a lot of times we stop at the wounded child, the child who felt pain, confusion, betrayal, or shame. These feelings are so potent, and it's natural to find something so powerful and think it's the core. Try to go one layer deeper, right down into the programming, to find out how these intense feelings and experiences are used to create an equation that sums to death. Usually, there is no image of a child at this level. The wounded child with unmet needs is in the layers above. This layer is just programming. It's just a string of statements and equations that ends in X equals death. For Elizabeth, it might look something like this. People accept me in this shape. Acceptance equals love, and love equals survival. Other people decide what shape is acceptable. The acceptable shape equals survival. If others see me change shape, they will reject me. Changing shape equals rejection. Rejection equals abandonment. Abandonment equals death. Changing shape equals death. If you're operating in advanced mode, you can go a step further after you communicate with the child selves to discover the unmet need and the coping strategy. You can go to each instance of the child self involved in this survival program and bring her home. A sliver of your soul is trapped in that program, and you can retrieve it and reintegrate it. It's something like a soul retrieval. Elizabeth, my suggestions to you are to revisit 2 meditations given in the energy clearing section of the Hooks and Chords course. One is for retrieving child selves, and the other is for clearing the body. Try these 2 energy clearing meditations with the specific intention of bringing the child selves trapped within the survival program home and releasing the grid of the false reality from your body. But remember, you can only fully retrieve these child selves if you satisfy the unmet need. They are stuck there as sentinels, keeping you safe, insisting you continue to use the childhood coping strategy to meet your needs. They won't come home until you demonstrate that you can and will meet the need in another way. And by now you've figured out that you can't logic your way out of this because we're dealing with a survival program. So even though it doesn't make sense, the system reads it as mortal danger. And protecting you from mortal danger will always be prioritized over personal growth or whatever goals your conscious mind has chosen. You have a situation where one part of the brain is saying, you're in mortal danger, but there's nothing in your present reality to corroborate it. There's nothing real upon which your conscious mind can anchor and focus this danger. And this produces a kind of cognitive dissonance, a contradiction that your conscious mind will seek to resolve by making up a plausible narrative to justify, explain, and endorse the need to resist, to prevent you from fulfilling your original intentions. I want you to imagine standing on the very edge of a steep cliff. Your toes are at the very edge of this cliff, and if you lean forward, you're going to fall to your death. You can practically feel that abyss, that nothingness, the lack of any solid ground, a great chasm in front of you. Really let yourself imagine this and feel this. It's terrifying, almost sickening, and your immediate reaction is to back away. You don't have to think about it or justify it or decide to back away. That reaction comes from a very powerful part of your brain that has nothing to do with thinking and choosing and deciding. This is the visceral feeling invoked by the childhood survival program. You get your toes right up to one of those boundaries and that powerful visceral reaction happens, only there's no cliff, no yawning chasm, and it makes no sense. Your adult conscious mind can't process that reaction directly because it in no way matches reality. There is no mortal danger. In fact, there may be no danger at all, mortal or otherwise. The childhood survival program is out of place in your adult reality. But the fear, the alarm must be obeyed, whether you understand it or not. The alarm that says you're going to die if you go further is primary, and it must be obeyed. So your adult conscious mind starts making up a whole alternate or false reality to explain and justify why you refuse to go beyond that boundary. It comes up with reasons and a whole narrative to make your actions plausible. So to recap, you're getting right up to that boundary and your childhood program gets triggered. This is a really critical point. The childhood program doesn't generate anything else. It doesn't actually generate the beliefs, the tactics, the propaganda, the story, the justifications. Your adult mind does this in reaction to receiving this powerful alarm with nothing in your reality to justify it. So it makes up a reality in which it does make sense. It devises strategies that allow you to back away and to justify why you feel the need to do so. It's not your childhood survival program that generates all that propaganda, the false reality. This need to create a plausible narrative doesn't just apply to how your mind works when dealing with resistance either. I'll give you a fascinating example based on research with split brain patients. That is, people who've had the connection between their left and right brain hemispheres severed. Let's see how the conscious mind constructs narratives to explain subconscious impulses and actions. An experiment was run where a researcher flashed 2 images simultaneously to a person who had the connection between their brain hemispheres severed. Now, a different image was shown exclusively to each eye. A snow-covered house to the left eye, which is processed by the right brain hemisphere, and a chicken claw to the right eye, processed by the left hemisphere. If you're not aware, the perceptions of the left side of the body are actually processed by the right hemisphere and vice versa. So each eye is shown a different image simultaneously. The patient is asked to choose one card with each hand that matches what they've seen. And using their left hand, they pick a card with a snow shovel. And with their right hand, they pick a card with a chicken. When asked why they chose the snow shovel, the patient's left hemisphere, which is responsible for language and explaining actions, it responds, "Oh, the shovel is for cleaning out the chicken coop." This explanation is entirely fabricated. The right hemisphere, which saw the snowy house, directed the left hand to choose the snow shovel. However, because the hemispheres can no longer communicate with each other, the left hemisphere has no idea why the snow shovel was chosen. To make sense of that action, it creates a logical but incorrect narrative that aligns with the image it was shown, which is the chicken claw. In a similar fashion, your conscious mind, unaware of the true reasons, creates a plausible narrative to rationalize your fear, your resistance, your instinctive move to pull yourself back from a cliff that doesn't exist, allowing your conscious mind to preserve a false sense of agency, control, and logical consistency. Your mind needs itself and the world to make sense. When you're working on deconstructing and resolving a resistance program based on a childhood survival program, you're dealing with 2 components. The first is the childhood program, which sounds the alarm for a danger that doesn't exist. If you don't recognize and arrest the process right there, your conscious mind will jump in and fabricate a narrative, a false reality, to explain and justify obedience to that initial fear. So if you're trying to reason with, comfort, or negotiate with the child self, the one you see as wounded and fearful, it's helpful to understand that the child self is the source of the alarm, not the propaganda. Let's talk about real fear versus fake fear. Your healthy adult system knows how to deal with fear of death, and it's not by avoiding anything that might kill you. You may have noticed that we do all kinds of things that are extremely dangerous. I mean, I myself have no desire to die, and yet I've surfed in shark-infested waters, ridden a motorcycle in India, no less, and I've gone skydiving. All activities I chose to do knowing the risks and taking whatever precautions were available. I've also survived life-threatening situations involving scary humans. Your mind and your system are equipped to deal with assessing risk and processing danger and overcoming fear. Where it goes off the rails is where one part of you insists there's a tiger in the room and sets off the survival alarm system, while the conscious mind sees no tiger nor anything resembling a tiger. When you force your system to cope with something that isn't real, it does all manner of weird and unhelpful things. And recall the 2 important themes when dealing with programs. Distinguish between what's real and not real, what's you and what's not you. And don't invest your energy, your identity, your endorsement into a false reality. So let's return to the sandbox and take a closer look at this false reality that the mind is creating in response to your childhood survival program. Let's examine the narrative your mind has created. Bear in mind that as we're going through this on the surface, it might look like we're refuting these claims one by one, but that's not really my purpose here. I want you to pay attention to where you are grounding or investing your identity. I want you to notice the stark difference between the voice and energy and signature of the false reality and the small self that would inhabit it, in contrast to your authentic self, the one who is grounded in reality, the one who trusts herself. Another thing to notice is that the false reality makes you stupid. I know that sounds offensive on the face of it, but it's true. And to be clear, Elizabeth is anything but stupid. But the false reality is so shallow and brittle, and it requires you to abandon your intelligence, your curiosity, your ability to face challenges, to solve even simple problems, to to organize your life, and to be creative. This is what false realities demand of all of us. These are the hallmarks of a synthetic false reality. The small synthetic mind versus the mind, the capital M mind that each of us possesses. Your unencumbered human mind is absolutely ace at figuring things out, getting from here to there, at customizing your environment to suit not only needs but preferences, to satisfy your curiosity. Humans are inventive, and we don't take no for an answer. We go to space. We go to the depths of the sea. We figure out everything in between, great and small. And that's your inheritance, Elizabeth, and it's mine too. Think about everything our ancestors had to figure out to get us to this point. Shall we claim it, the ingenuity of the human mind, or shall we pretend to be lesser beings? All right, Elizabeth, we're going to explore your false reality. And I think by the end, you'll see this is not the kind of neighborhood you want to hang out in. So let's start at the top. Being consistent with every practice is hard. First of all, I'd say we struck gold here. This reveals that consistency is key. Your propaganda machine is going overtime trying to specifically prevent you from being consistent. It must know that if you were consistent, even for a relatively short period of time, you would blast through to another level. The false reality asserts that consistency means you have to commit to doing every practice every day, all the time. And of course, that's silly. It's untrue. And you know this. At any given stage, there are certain practices that will bring you the greatest result, the growth that's perfect for you. And if you commit to those practices and let yourself go deep with them, you'll open up whole new depths of awareness, discovery, and being. At any given time, there might be one main practice to focus on. And in my experience, and let me know if it's the same for you, when I'm not under the influence of a false reality, I don't actually need to commit to the practice. The practice pulls me into it. It fills me up, envelops me. I find myself doing it when I'm taking a walk, when I'm in the shower, before I go to sleep. It's not like I have to tie myself to the mast or anything. So you don't actually have to do every practice, and it's not like a grim commitment, but you know this. The false reality asks you to abandon your clarity and intelligence for one of its facile slogans. Next, how do I explain to my family and friends that I'm on an influence fast so I won't be taking their calls? Okay, some background here. Elizabeth is referring to a lesson in the Peerless course that prescribes a practice similar to a digital detox. So just listen to the tone of the question. In the false reality, the small mind isn't asking an actual question. It isn't curious. It isn't looking for an answer. It's a question that starts with how do I, but it really is saying I can't and I won't. It's an assertion that you are incapable or unwilling to figure it out, to make it happen. It's entirely beyond your capability. Now contrast that with a true question, an honest question, one that's asked from the authentic self, where you assume the agency, creativity, and intelligence to find answers. It sounds more like this. What's the best way to explain that I'm experimenting with a short digital detox and won't be available for a couple days? Big difference, right? Your family will survive and they'll still love you. Your friends will still be your friends. There are a lot of mundane situations where you might be unreachable for a couple days. I frequently travel to different countries and sometimes it takes more than 30 hours to get from one place to another. I'm out of touch during that time and even after while I get situated. And recently I got severe food poisoning and was totally out for 3 days. It's really not unimaginable. But your false reality expects you to believe that something that is really not a big deal is totally weird, so completely abnormal that you couldn't possibly explain it to anyone. Next, and I love this one. Have you seen my natal chart? It's in my nature to prefer that things stay as they are. Okay, Elizabeth, you're not the only person who responded to me using their astrology as an excuse. I'm a Scorpio, or I've got a fixed sign stellium. It's absolutely precious. So I don't know your birth chart, Elizabeth, but I'll just guess that you have strong earth or fixed sign placements, or maybe both. And your false reality has eagerly taken ownership of this and once again turned it into a simplistic slogan, reducing the richness and immense power of being exceptionally grounded and stable into a handicap. Seriously, turning this great power into a weakness? Incredible. There's another belief that I'd like to address at the same time because they're related. And that is that you may harbor an unconscious belief that the expanded you, the you outside the sandbox, the you that has agency and authority, the you that has magic and isn't sorry, that version of yourself is really weird. I mean, just totally unacceptably weird. She's a woo monster. I mean, who could trust her? Who could take her seriously? If you truly wake up spiritually, magically, who knows what you're gonna be like? Who knows what you're gonna do? And so everything is at risk because you might become such a weirdo that your family and friends won't be able to relate to you anymore. You're gonna be totally obnoxious, constantly speaking your truth, and the massive internal changes you go through will be evident to everyone. You'll be unable or unwilling to hide them, and you'll just be out there, a weirdo, exposed, and you'll lose everything. Now, what makes you think that when you step outside the small, limited self and wake up into your authority, your agency, your power, that you'll be any different on the outside? Why do you assume your whole life will be turned inside out? Really stop and think about this. And even if you do go through massive changes internally, spiritually, the fact that you have an exceptionally grounded, fixed and stable natal chart means that you have the power to hold and channel that energy in a stable, grounded, and practical way. It means no matter how far out your inner exploration takes you, the way you shape and express it in your life is not going to be flighty or fanciful or out of control. Because your natal chart is so grounded and fixed, it actually affords you the security to go all out without fearing losing your tether to family, safety, home, responsibility, and normalcy, because you're sane, you're organized, and you're reliable, not only to others, and I want you to fully grasp that you are these things to and for yourself because of your natal chart. Isn't that marvelous? Isn't that such a blessing? Elizabeth, no one who meets me thinks I'm weird. I have no particular need to talk about my magic, my spirituality. My inner life is largely private. I'm responsible, relatable, people like and trust me, and why should it be otherwise? There's a difference between hiding who you are because you are afraid or ashamed and keeping your inner life private because it just is private. I don't need people to see and acknowledge my spirituality or magic. I provide my own validation, and I am not looking for anyone to accept me for who I am. Therefore, I don't need to create demonstrations of who I am. And who I am includes more weird stuff than I could ever describe, but it also includes a lot of very normal, grounded, and utterly relatable aspects, and there's no conflict or tension between them. You can disclose whatever you like, but you may find that once your source of authority and validation is no longer external, but internal, you don't see much of a need for it. So related to this is a belief I suspect you have, which is that you don't trust yourself or the people in your life. And this goes back to that wounded child trying to get her needs met. She needed other people to accept her and to let her know it was safe to be herself in full. But she didn't get that, and she may not trust that other people have the ability to accept any variance from the norm. So in your false reality, these people you love and who love you are so shallow, so emotionally and intellectually thin that they would reject you and abandon you if you grew beyond your narrow bounds. If you stop looking to them for validation, that doesn't make you insensitive. If you expand your spiritual or magical awareness, you don't need to send out a group text to let everyone know. If you accept your own authority and agency, it doesn't mean you're going to become selfish or rude or unlovable. They will notice a change, but it need not be dramatic, and they will adjust. Why? Because it's not a big deal. And hear this, Elizabeth, because you're worth it. I have no doubt that you've earned a great deal of love, respect, and this is important, goodwill from those who are truly close to you, the people who matter. Yet you've created a false reality where the people in your life cannot handle a slight variance from the norm. If you're off the phone for a couple days, nope, everyone freaks out. If you reorganize some aspects of your life, forget it. Oh my God, we're out of here. Look, I don't know your family or friends, but I just doubt this is universally true. Perhaps it's less about them being unable to handle you being different, and it's more that you can't accept these aspects of yourself. Sure, maybe your family is made up of hardcore normies, but you're a thoroughly delightful person, and they love you, and I do think there's adequate wiggle room for them to adjust. Remember, you're not going to turn into a total freak or run off and join a cult. Just look at your natal chart. They might tease you. They might gossip about you. There might be a few awkward moments, but they probably won't disown you or burn you at the stake. But if you don't accept your own weirdness, your magic, your spirituality, all your fabulous woo, and especially your own authority and agency, then it's natural to externalize that exaggerated rigidity, non-acceptance, and shame onto those around you. If you become who you really are, is that unacceptably weird or somehow shameful to you? Okay, Elizabeth, that's a lot to take in, but hopefully you can see how poorly constructed and superficial the false reality is. It's a facade and it's only 2 millimeters deep. It crumbles when you merely look at it. To invest your identity into it, to inhabit that reality requires you abandon your agency, your intelligence, your depth, your creativity, and your self-honesty. And remember, at the core, you're using a strategy of a small child to meet your need for love and acceptance and safety. It worked for her. It kept her safe and alive, but now it's time to meet your needs as an adult, as a wise and strong woman. Here's an exercise for you, Elizabeth. Practice moving your focus, your energy, and your identity between the false reality and your authentic self. You already know how to do both. If the false reality is exerting any effect on you, then you have invested your identity into it. You've fed it your energy. Now just do that without resisting. Just let it tell you all these untruths and try to let yourself really believe them. Being consistent is hard. I can't tell my family I won't be available for a couple days. It's my nature to resist change. I'll lose everything I cherish. I'm not okay. Sure, go on, really get into it. And then take a cleansing breath and move your focus, your identity, your energy into your authentic self. See the clarity and strength and honesty that comes up naturally. I tell myself the truth. I'm creative and capable. My primary relationship is with myself. I trust myself. I'm strong and resilient. People love and trust me. I am my own authority, and I create my own security. I first meet my own needs and then look to others. And I'm okay. I'm okay now as I am, and I'll be okay in the future as I become. So we've done a lot. We've investigated childhood survival program, the one that sounds the alarm. We discovered the unmet need and the child's strategy to get that need met and stay safe. Then we took apart the false reality generated by your mind in response to having to process a fear that isn't real. Above or below all this, however you want to imagine the structure, is a meta program. I envision the meta programs as above because there are lots of programs nested under this meta program, and we can call this meta program permission. It has a wide-ranging effect in many areas of your life. This meta program isn't complicated. You can think of it as just having basic settings related to where your permission comes from and under what conditions. The first setting is easy enough to understand. Where does your permission come from? Is it internal or external? It's a default setting, and when you're a child, most often this is set to external. And many of us as adults believe we've changed this setting, but we haven't. We've just fiddled with the second setting, which is under what condition is permission granted. This looks something like, I have permission to have a successful career if I graduate college and get my degree. I have permission to feel secure if I'm married. I have permission to take time for myself if I'm sick or injured. As you can see, the conditions are not based on reality, just beliefs. There are lots of people who have become famously successful without finishing college. My second example, I have permission to feel secure if I'm married. I think most of us can see how this is evidently not true, and yet if you have this conditional setting, your life will be unconsciously organized around it. Now, how about my last example? I have permission to take time for myself if I'm sick or injured. This seems obvious. Of course you do. You're sick or you're hurt. You're incapacitated. But what really lies at the heart of this one is that it's very difficult for you to unplug unless you're sick or injured. This is the condition required for you to comfortably set those boundaries. So you'll find that an unconscious pressure will build up, and then you'll end up getting sick, or less often, you'll hurt yourself. And you'll be able to unplug from everyone and everything, and even thinking about anything. And in this case, just be sick. You'll probably find that you have a favorite chronic illness that you use for this purpose, one that's likely not severe or dangerous, but debilitating enough to qualify for permission. If you look deeply and objectively, most people who believe they have an internal locus of authority actually don't. And not everyone can access their meta programs, at least at first. But Elizabeth is an advanced practitioner. So Elizabeth, I offer this to you briefly, and I'm sure you'll discover a lot as you explore it in your own time. What is your permission setting, internal or external? What are your conditional settings, specifically around this resistance program we're discussing? I have permission to explore personal growth if, or I'll allow myself to feel safe when. There's another more subtle and hard to reach meta program that is part of the permission system. And this one is one that you, Elizabeth, should definitely investigate. And this is called responsibility. Again, it has two settings, the master setting, which is the default, and the conditional settings. The master setting is essentially I'm responsible for myself or I'm not responsible for myself. Internal or external. That's it. It sounds pretty simple, but it's really not. The second settings are the conditional settings. Under what conditions will I accept responsibility for myself? Under what conditions do I assign responsibility for myself to others? Under what conditions do I assume responsibility for others? Are you responsible for meeting your need for acceptance? The focus is externalized. It's whether other people will accept you. And that is a legitimate need for everyone, but it's secondary. The primary relationship is with yourself, and therefore self-acceptance is primary. Self-validation is primary. Welcoming yourself unconditionally is primary. And none of this can happen until you truly accept responsibility for yourself and shift your primary reference point, the point from external to internal. Now, what does it even mean to take full responsibility for yourself? Does it mean you earn a living and make your bed and take care of your health and pay your taxes, treat your fellow humans with kindness? Because Elizabeth is an exceptionally responsible person by this or any common measure. But all these expressions of responsibility are far downstream from this meta program. This is more about existential responsibility. It's a huge and very rich topic, but this question of whether you accept full responsibility for yourself, your spirit, your human vehicle, your life, your needs, your self-expression, and beyond. Will you be fully accountable and responsible to yourself? If not, then to whom or what are you responsible and accountable? If your responsibility isn't rooted internally, then it's external. I'm responsible to something else. I'm responsible for something else. I'm accountable to something else. Something else is responsible for my growth, well-being, happiness, spiritual development, or healing. In this case, I'm still using a child's framework for responsibility. I'm incomplete and unable to accept my inheritance and take my throne. I don't trust myself to guide, protect, and nurture myself through this life. There are a lot of reasons we outright refuse to take existential responsibility for ourselves, to be accountable at this level to ourselves, and instead we immerse ourselves in a false reality where we're responsible for and to other people. Their needs, their feelings, their beliefs, their opinions, their well-being, their healing absorb our focus. And there are a million ways in which this externalization happens. What it comes down to is displacing your responsibility for yourself with a false reality in which you place others at the center of your responsibility and accountability. This may be others in the form of other people or God, religion, organizations, ideologies. So we started with a frustrating resistance program that prevents you from selecting a practice that would be most effective for you right now and following it with your whole heart and being. Following it simply and deeply and discovering what it has to show you. Resistance programs are gifts. If you carefully unwrap the gift layer by layer, what you discover will be priceless, useful, and very deep. You would not have been able to see all this so clearly if the program hadn't revealed itself in the form of resistance. Elizabeth, you have a lot to investigate, think about, and discover, and thank you truly for sharing this with all of us. In my next podcast, we'll be taking a look at the Critical Inner Voice program. I hope you'll join me for that, and if you're interested in my work, there are a ton of resources on my website. You can find out more using the links I left below. Thanks for being here. Cheers, everyone.